You people always think you can just take whatever you want, Officer Ryan Mitchell exclaimed as his hand locked around Sydney Tillman's wrist before she could reach the receipt in her bag. He pulled the handcuffs from his belt with the casual confidence of a man who had done this before. Sydney's shopping bags hit the pavement as the cuffs clicked shut around her wrist. She stood straight, spine rigid, jaw tight, while Mitchell steered her toward the cruiser like she was exactly what he'd already decided she was. But what he didn't know was that the woman standing in front of him wasn't just anyone. She was the wife of an FBI agent trained to expose injustice without hesitation. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The day was too pretty for what was about to happen. Maywood, Georgia sat under a wide blue sky, the kind that made you forget the world had sharp edges. The Brentwood Mall parking lot was full of Saturday afternoon people, families loading trunks, teenagers drifting in packs, old couples walking slowly with nowhere to be. The air smelled like cut grass and car exhaust, and a funnel cake stand near the east entrance. Sydney Tillman stepped through the mall's sliding doors at 2:17 in the afternoon, carrying 2 shopping bags and a receipt for every single thing inside them. She was 34 years old, a high school principal, 8 years married. She had spent her entire adult life in rooms full of people who needed to trust her, and it showed in the way she carried herself, the way her shoulders sat back, the quiet authority in her stride. The blouse in the first bag was for her sister's birthday. The earrings in the second were a small treat for herself, something she almost talked herself out of, but didn't. She reached into her purse for her car keys. "Ma'am, stop right there." The voice came fast and hard. No question in it. No courtesy. Just a command thrown across the parking lot like something meant to drop a person in their tracks. Sydney turned. 2 officers moved toward her at speed. The first one, broad-shouldered, square jaw, a look on his face like a man who'd already made up his mind, was Ryan Mitchell. His partner, Evan Laxon, followed a half-step behind, and trailing several feet back, looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else on Earth, was Oliver Brandon, a Brentwood Mall loss prevention officer in a wrinkled polo shirt. Mitchell reached her first. His eyes ran over her like she was a problem he was solving, not a person he was speaking to. "You match the description of a shoplifter," he said. "Jewelry counter. 20 minutes ago." Sydney blinked. Once. Then she took a slow breath the way she did when a student said something that required patience instead of reaction. "I didn't shoplift anything," she said clearly. "I paid for everything in these bags. I have my receipts right here." She reached her hand toward the bag. Mitchell's hand shot out and locked around her wrist. "Don't reach." The words hit the air like a door slamming. Sydney froze. Her heart kicked against her chest, but her face stayed still. She had learned young how to keep her face still. "Officer, I'm just trying to show you—" "I said don't reach." Oliver Brandon cleared his throat behind them. "Officer Mitchell. She actually came through the register. I'm pretty sure I saw her at the—" "I've got it handled, Oliver." Mitchell didn't even look at him. A small crowd had begun to gather without fully meaning to. A woman stopped pushing her cart. A man with a toddler on his hip slowed down and stared. A teenage girl in a yellow shirt put her hand over her mouth. Officer Laxon moved to Sydney's other side. Together, the 2 of them boxed her in like she was dangerous, like she was something to be contained. "Turn around, please," Mitchell said. He didn't make it sound like a please. "This is a mistake." Sydney's voice was steady, but the steadiness cost something. "I want you to know that. This is a mistake, and I have proof." The handcuffs came out. The clicking sound they made was quiet, almost polite, but it landed on that parking lot like a thunderclap. Sydney Tillman, A young woman who had never been arrested in her life. A woman who remembered to carry her receipts specifically for moments the world told her she'd better be prepared for. Stood with her hands cuffed behind her back in the middle of a crowded Saturday afternoon, while a bag containing a birthday blouse and a pair of earrings sat at her feet in the Georgia sun. She did not cry. She did not yell. She stood straight. Because she had decided, years ago, that they would never get the satisfaction of watching her fold. Across the parking lot, 67-year-old Emily Romers hadn't moved a single inch. She was a retired schoolteacher with arthritic knees and no patience left for injustice. She held her phone up with both hands, camera steady, and she did not lower it. She had seen this before. She knew how it worked. She also knew that this time someone needed to make sure the whole world saw it too. Charlie Tillman had not looked up from his phone once in the last 20 minutes. He was parked 3 rows back from the mall entrance, driver's seat reclined just slightly, working through a call with the Atlanta field office about a case that had nothing to do with Maywood, Georgia, or this parking lot, or this particular Saturday afternoon. His FBI windbreaker was draped across his lap. He'd come straight from a morning debrief and hadn't bothered to take it off. He was mid-sentence when he looked up through the windshield. He stopped talking. His wife was in handcuffs. "I'll call you back." He didn't wait for a response. The car door was open before the phone hit the seat. Charlie moved across that parking lot the way he had been trained to move in tense situations. Steady, controlled, no wasted energy. He pulled the windbreaker on as he walked. FBI in gold letters across the chest and across the back. He unclipped his credentials from his belt and held them open in his left hand. Face out, the way you do when you want there to be absolutely no confusion about who you are. He covered the distance in 12 seconds. "Excuse me." His voice was calm, firm, professional. "My name is Special Agent Charlie Tillman, Federal Bureau of Investigation." He held the badge higher. "That is my wife. I need you to explain to me what probable cause you have for this arrest." Mitchell turned. He looked at the badge. Really looked at it, took his time, let his eyes move over it slowly, the way someone does when they're deciding something. Then he looked at Charlie. Something passed across Mitchell's face. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't embarrassment. It was closer to irritation. Like Charlie was a complication he hadn't asked for, but wasn't particularly worried about either. "Sir," Mitchell said, "I need you to step back from this arrest. I've identified myself as a federal agent." Charlie kept his voice even. "I'm asking you a direct question about probable cause. What evidence do you have that my wife shoplifted anything?" Mitchell tilted his head slightly. "And I'm telling you to step back. This is an active arrest. You're interfering. I'm asking a question. Step back, sir." Mitchell put a wall of boredom behind every word, like Charlie was mildly annoying and nothing more. Sydney was watching her husband from 3 feet away. Her eyes were steady, but her jaw was tight. She knew what she was looking at. She had been married to Charlie long enough to know what it cost him to stand there with his badge in the air and his voice at a measured volume while everything in him was pulling in another direction. Officer Laxon moved without being told. He stepped sideways and positioned his body between Charlie and Sydney. A deliberate move, a practiced one. A wall in a blue uniform. "You need to back up," Laxon said. His tone had an edge. Mitchell's didn't. Younger, less patient, looking for something. Charlie did not look at Laxon. He kept his eyes on Mitchell. "You looked at my credentials," Charlie said. "You know what they say. I am asking you one more time. What is your probable cause?" Mitchell smiled. It was the smallest smile Charlie had ever wanted to knock off a person's face. "One more time," Mitchell said quietly, almost friendly. "Step back, or we'll have a whole different kind of conversation." The crowd around them had grown. Nobody was pretending not to watch anymore. A man near a pickup truck shook his head slowly. A woman pulled her daughter closer. Oliver Brandon stood 20 feet back, staring at the ground, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, like a man who knew something was wrong and had decided that knowing was enough. Charlie looked at his wife. Sydney gave him the smallest, most controlled nod he had ever seen. Don't. Not here. Not like this. He understood. He had seen enough cases in 14 years to know exactly how the next 60 seconds would be described in a police report if he pushed forward. He knew what words they would use. He knew which parts they would leave out. He took one step back. He kept the badge open in his hand. He stood there, 5 feet away, credential case held at his side, jaw set like concrete, and watched Ryan Mitchell put his hand on Sydney's arm and walk her toward the cruiser. Across the lot, Emily Romers's hands hadn't moved. Her phone was still up, still recording. She got every second of it. Emily Romers lowered her phone the moment the cruiser pulled away. She stood in the middle of that parking lot and looked down at the screen. The video was 4 minutes and 11 seconds long. It showed everything. Sydney's calm, the grab, the badge, Mitchell's smile, all of it. Every second, uncut, in the bright Georgia afternoon light. Emily had been a schoolteacher for 31 years. She had learned a long time ago that the truth had a short window before someone found a way to shut it. She typed her caption with steady thumbs. This woman had her receipts. Her husband showed a federal badge. They took her anyway. Maywood, GA. Today. She posted it before the cruiser reached the parking lot exit. The processing room was small and cold and smelled like disinfectant trying to cover something worse. They put Sydney in a chair against a cinder-block wall painted the color of old teeth. A single rectangular window sat near the ceiling, too high to see anything through except a thin strip of blue sky. A wall-mounted camera blinked red in the corner, telling her that someone, somewhere, was watching. A female officer named Norford took her shopping bags at the door. Not roughly, but without asking. Sydney watched her bags disappear through a second door and felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear. Something older and quieter than fear. Something she had grown up being told she was too sensitive for feeling. She folded her hands in her lap and sat straight. The cuffs had come off when they brought her inside, but her wrists still felt the ghost of them. She pressed her fingers together and breathed slowly, the way she did before a difficult parent meeting where someone was about to say something that required her to stay composed. You have done nothing wrong. She said it to herself, like a fact, not a comfort. Because it was a fact. That was the part that sat in her stomach like a stone. Not the handcuffs. Not Mitchell's face. Not the crowd watching her like she was a spectacle someone had arranged for their Saturday afternoon. It was the receipts. She was 34 years old, a high school principal. She remembered every student's name. She showed up early, stayed late, and poured herself into that school like it was a calling, because it was. And still, she carried her receipts. Every single time. Not because she was careless, because her mother had told her quietly, when she was 11 years old, that the world would sometimes need more proof from her than from other people. Her mother hadn't been angry when she said it. Just matter of fact. The way you are when you're preparing your child for weather. Sydney had never stopped being angry about that conversation. Officer Norford returned to take her fingerprints. She did it without a word, which Sydney was grateful for. A younger officer came in afterward to confirm her name and address for the third time. She answered clearly, completely, without attitude, because attitude was a luxury she could not afford in this room, and they both knew it. He left without explaining how long it would take. The clock on the wall read 3:02 p.m. Sydney looked at that thin strip of blue sky and thought about her sister's birthday blouse and whether it had gotten wrinkled. She thought about her students. She thought about that teenage girl in the yellow shirt, the one who had put her hand over her mouth in the parking lot. She hoped the girl was still watching. She hoped she was paying close attention. Because this, all of this, was something a young woman needed to understand about the world she was walking into. The door opened. Norford held out her shopping bags without ceremony. "You're free to go." Sydney stood. She took the bags. She did not say thank you. Charlie was sitting in the plastic waiting room chair when the side door opened. He had been there for 45 minutes. Hands folded, back straight, phone face down on his knee. The front desk officer had gone red in the neck after looking at his credentials and made 3 hushed phone calls in a row. Charlie had sat through all of it without moving. What he hadn't known while he waited was that Oliver Brandon had already called the precinct from the mall's security office. He'd pulled the register footage himself. Sydney Tillman at the jewelry counter register, 1:54 p.m. Transaction time-stamped, card verified, receipt printed. The door opened. Sydney walked through it, bags in hand, head up. Their eyes met across the waiting room. Neither of them said a word. They didn't need to. He came out of a side hallway like he'd been waiting just around the corner. Sergeant Troy Dunham was 52 years old, thick through the middle, with silver hair combed back neat, and a face built for city council meetings. He moved across the precinct lobby with his hand already extended, his expression already arranged into something that was supposed to look like concern. "Agent Tillman." He shook Charlie's hand with both of his. Firm, warm, practiced. "I am so glad we could get this sorted out quickly. What a difficult situation for everyone involved." Charlie shook his hand once and let go. Dunham turned to Sydney with the careful smile of a man who had spent years learning how to seem sincere. "Mrs. Tillman, I want you to know how much we regret any distress this may have caused you today." Sydney looked at him the way she looked at people who said things that didn't mean anything. She didn't respond. "What happened out there," Dunham continued, clasping his hands together now, "was a miscommunication. A difficult set of circumstances that our officers had to navigate in real time. These situations, they move fast. Decisions get made. Sometimes," he tilted his head slightly, "sometimes those decisions could have been handled with a bit more sensitivity." Charlie waited until he was certain Dunham was finished. "Which officer made the arrest?" he said. Dunham blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The officer who handcuffed my wife. I'd like his name and badge number for the record." Something moved behind Dunham's eyes, very briefly, like a door opening and closing in the same second. "That information will be available through the proper channels, of course. I want to assure you that we take incidents like this extremely seriously, and we will be conducting a full—" "His name and badge number," Charlie said again. Same tone, same volume, like a wall. Dunham smiled patiently. "Agent Tillman, I understand you're upset. That is completely understandable. What I can tell you is that the department takes your concerns very seriously, and we appreciate the professionalism you showed today under very difficult circumstances." He said it like Charlie should be grateful. Charlie looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once, slowly. The nod of a man filing something away. "Thank you for your time, Sergeant." He put his hand on the small of Sydney's back, and they walked out together through the precinct's front doors into the late afternoon sun. They didn't talk much on the drive home. Sydney sat in the passenger seat with her shopping bags on her lap and watched the streets of Maywood pass by, the gas stations and the nail salons and the Little League field where the sprinklers were still running even though nobody was on it. She had the look she got sometimes when she was working through something big and needed silence to do it. Charlie let her have it. He made dinner when they got home. Nothing complicated. pasta, garlic bread, a salad he put together mostly to have something to do with his hands. Sydney ate at the kitchen table, and they talked a little about ordinary things. Her sister's birthday, a student who'd been struggling in math, whether the back porch needed repainting before summer. Normal things, safe things. Things that reminded them both that they had a life that existed outside of parking lots and processing rooms. After dinner, Sydney stood up, kissed Charlie once on the cheek, and told him she was going to bed early. She looked tired in the deep way. Not physically, but the kind of tired that comes from spending an entire day holding yourself together when everything around you was trying to make you fall apart. He listened to her footsteps move down the hallway. He sat at the kitchen table for a while in the quiet. Then he opened his laptop. His phone showed 43 missed notifications. He ignored them all except one, a text from a colleague showing him the view count on Emily Romers's video. Charlie stared at the number for a moment. 800,000 views. He set the phone down and opened a browser window. He pulled up Emily's video from the original post and let it run. He watched the whole thing with his elbows on the table and his chin in his hands. When it reached the moment where he had held up his credentials, where Mitchell had taken a long look at the badge and then looked deliberately away, Charlie reached out and pressed pause. He stared at that frozen frame for a long time. Then he opened a new tab, moved his fingers to the keyboard, and typed 2 words. Ryan Mitchell. The house was completely still. It was past midnight. The only light in the entire place came from Charlie's laptop screen, casting a pale glow across the kitchen table. Somewhere down the hall, Sydney was asleep. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice and went quiet. The hum of the refrigerator was the loudest thing in the room. Charlie didn't notice any of it. He had been at the table for 3 hours. He was working with what any private citizen could legally access: public court records, FOIA databases, municipal filings, complaint logs pulled from the Maywood PD's own transparency portal. He wasn't using bureau resources. He wasn't making official inquiries. He was just a man with a laptop and 14 years of knowing exactly where to look. What he found made his jaw tighten 1 degree at a time. Ryan Mitchell had been with the Maywood Police Department for 6 years. In the last 4 of those years, 6 formal complaints had been filed against him. 6. Charlie pulled each one up and read it carefully, the way he read everything, slowly, looking for the shape underneath the language. 5 of the 6 complainants were black residents of Maywood. Every single complaint had been reviewed by the same person, Sergeant Troy Dunham. Every single one had been dismissed. Charlie sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a moment. Then he leaned forward and kept reading. 3 of the complainants had been quietly discouraged from pursuing civil action. The discouragement wasn't documented anywhere official. That wasn't how it worked. It never was. It showed up in the gaps instead. Cases that stalled. Follow-up calls that went unreturned. One woman who had filed a complaint about an unlawful search had withdrawn it 11 days after submission with no explanation. Another man had retained a lawyer and then unretained him 2 weeks later. The lawyer's name was in the public filing. Charlie wrote it down. Then he found Harold Green. Harold was 58 years old, a church deacon. He had been stopped by Mitchell 2 years ago while walking home from Sunday service. Suit and tie, Bible under his arm, 3 blocks from his front door. He had been detained on the sidewalk for 40 minutes with no charges, no explanation given, and released without so much as a citation. He had filed a formal complaint with the department 8 days later. The complaint had been reviewed by Dunham. But there was something else. A note buried in a supplemental filing that Harold's attorney had attached before the case was dropped. A single paragraph describing a conversation Harold had with Sergeant Dunham directly. Dunham had told him, in those words, in that office, that pursuing the matter wouldn't go well for him. Charlie read that paragraph 3 times. He pushed back from the table and stood up. He walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the dark backyard for a minute, hands braced on the counter. The neighbor's dog had gone quiet. Everything was still. This wasn't one bad officer on one bad day. This was a system, built carefully, maintained quietly, protected from the top. Mitchell was the visible part. Dunham was the machinery behind him. And somewhere above Dunham, Charlie was willing to bet, was someone who made sure the machinery kept running. He went back to the table and kept working. By 1:30 in the morning, he had a timeline built across 4 open browser tabs and 2 pages of handwritten notes. He had names, dates, case numbers, and the beginning of a pattern that any investigator worth anything would recognize immediately. He picked up his phone. Gloria Harmon answered on the 3rd ring. She was deputy director of the Atlanta field office and had been Charlie's supervisor for 6 years. She was also one of the sharpest people he had ever worked with, and she did not waste words. Charlie. Her voice was alert, despite the hour. She had probably been awake. I saw the video. This isn't just about today, Charlie said. He kept his voice low, conscious of the hallway behind him. Mitchell has 6 prior complaints in 4 years. 5 of 6 complainants are black residents. Every single one was reviewed and killed by Dunham. One complainant, a man named Harold Green, was told by Dunham personally that pursuing his complaint wouldn't go well for him. Silence on the line. There's a pattern here, Gloria. A clear one. And someone has been protecting it. Another beat of silence. Longer this time. Send me everything tomorrow morning, Gloria said. All of it. Through my personal email, not the office system. Not yet. Understood. And Charlie. Her voice dropped just slightly. Be careful. He ended the call and sat for a moment in the quiet kitchen. Down the hall, Sidney slept. On his laptop screen, Harold Green's complaint sat open. That one paragraph highlighted in the blue light. Wouldn't go well for him. Charlie closed the laptop. But he didn't go to sleep for a long time. Charlie was up before sunrise. He had slept maybe 3 hours, which was enough. He made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and spent the first hour of Sunday morning organizing everything into a clean document. Names, dates, case numbers, the pattern laid out in plain language that left no room for interpretation. He sent it to Gloria's personal email at 7:14 a.m. with a single line in the subject field. For your eyes only. Then he closed the laptop and picked up his phone. He worked through the list methodically. The 5 complainants who had responded were cautious at first, guarded in the way people get when the system has already let them down once, and they're not sure why a federal agent is suddenly calling on a Sunday morning. Charlie understood that. He didn't push. He explained who he was, what he was looking into, and what he was not yet in a position to promise. He was straight with every single one of them. He owed them that much. 4 of the 5 agreed to talk further. The 5th said she needed to think about it. He told her to take all the time she needed and left his personal number. Harold Green called back last. It was just after noon when Charlie's phone buzzed with an unknown number. He answered it on the first ring. Agent Tillman. The voice was deep and measured, a voice that had learned to be careful. This is Harold Green. Mr. Green. Thank you for calling me back. A short pause. Your message said you were looking into Ryan Mitchell. Yes, sir. Another pause, longer this time. Charlie waited it out. I filed that complaint 2 years ago, Harold said finally. Took me 8 days to work up the nerve to do it. Spent those 8 days talking myself into it, telling myself it was the right thing. He stopped. Then Dunham called me into that office. Can you tell me what happened in that meeting? Harold Green let out a long breath. He sat across the desk from me like we were having a friendly conversation. Offered me coffee. Then he told me, calm as anything, like he was discussing the weather, that the department had looked into my complaint and found no basis for action. And then he said that if I chose to pursue the matter through other channels, given my record. Charlie went still. Your record? I got a DUI. 19 years ago. Paid my debt. Moved on. Built my life. Dunham knew about it. He sat there in that office and reminded me of it, like it was a weapon. Harold's voice tightened. He said that pursuing the matter wouldn't go well for me. Didn't spell it out beyond that. Didn't need to. Charlie pressed his fingers flat against the kitchen table. My daughter told me to let it go, Harold continued. She was scared. She's 26 years old, and she was scared for her father. And he stopped again. I let it go. Mr. Green, Charlie kept his voice steady. I want you to know that your name will not appear anywhere without your explicit permission. Nothing moves without your say-so. But what you just told me, it matters. It matters a great deal. Harold was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, something in his voice had shifted. Your wife, he said. I saw the video. Yes, sir. She held herself real well out there. She always does, Charlie said. Emily Romers picked up on the second ring and got straight to business. She had already secured the original unedited video file in 3 separate locations and was prepared to provide a certified copy to any federal investigator who needed it. She said all of this before Charlie had finished introducing himself, in the brisk, efficient tone of a woman who had anticipated this call and prepared accordingly. I'm 67 years old, Emily told him. I've seen this my whole life. I recorded it because I knew without that video, half the world would find a reason not to believe it. She paused. Did I do it right? You did exactly right, Ms. Romers. Good, she said simply. And that was that. Monday morning arrived, and Sydney went back to work. Charlie watched her get ready. The careful selection of her outfit, the extra few seconds she spent in front of the mirror. Not vanity. Armor. He understood the difference. She came home that afternoon and walked through the front door without saying anything for a moment. Then she told him what had happened. Her students had built a banner, stretched the full length of the main hallway, hand-lettered in thick marker by 30-some teenagers who had shown up early on a Monday morning specifically to make it. We stand with Mrs. Tillman. Sydney set her bag down on the kitchen counter. She had held herself together through morning announcements, through 3 class observations, through a staff meeting, through the entire long Monday of being looked at and worried over and quietly supported by every person in that building. She made it all the way home before it caught up with her. She closed her office, her kitchen, her real office, pressed her back against the counter, and wept. Not from grief. From the full, overwhelming weight of being seen, of being believed, of 30 teenagers with markers deciding that she was worth showing up early for. Charlie put his arms around her and didn't say a word. Sometimes there was nothing to say. The statement dropped on Monday afternoon. Charlie saw it first on the Maywood PD's official website, a block of carefully constructed language posted at 3:47 p.m., 72 hours after the arrest. He read it standing at the kitchen counter while Sydney was still at school. He read it twice. Then he printed it out and read it a third time with a pen in his hand. The Maywood Police Department has reviewed the events of Saturday, March 14th, and determined that Officer Mitchell acted in full compliance with established departmental protocol. The situation was resolved appropriately and in a timely manner. The Maywood PD remains deeply committed to building positive relationships within our community and will continue to serve all residents with professionalism and dedication. That was it. No names, no acknowledgement that the woman handcuffed in that parking lot had paid for everything in her bags. No mention of a federal agent presenting credentials at the scene. No explanation of what probable cause had existed in the first place. Just smooth, frictionless language designed to say absolutely nothing while appearing to say something. Charlie circled the word protocol with his pen and set it on the table. The counter story appeared Tuesday evening. It ran on a Maywood area news site called the Corridor Gazette, a local outlet that covered city council meetings and high school sports and the occasional human interest piece. The story had no byline. It was attributed simply to staff report. Charlie read the headline and felt his stomach drop. Witness accounts contradict viral video narrative. Sources inside MPD describe aggressive confrontation during Saturday arrest. The article was surgical in the way it worked. It never stated anything outright false. It just arranged the true things in the wrong order and left the important things out. It described a tense confrontation in the Brentwood Mall parking lot involving an unidentified man who had allegedly approached officers during an act of arrest. It used the phrase impeded police business twice. It quoted two anonymous sources inside the Maywood PD describing the man as agitated and confrontational. It mentioned credentials only in the final paragraph, buried after 300 words of framing, in a single sentence that said, the man's claims of federal employment were unverified at the time. Unverified. Charlie's FBI windbreaker with the gold lettering across the chest and back was visible in 11 separate frames of Emily Romers's video. The article made no mention of Sydney's receipts. It made no mention that she had been released without charges. It referred to her only as the subject of the arrest. By Wednesday morning, it had been picked up by 4 regional outlets and 2 national aggregators. The national outlets were careful. They framed it as a developing story with conflicting accounts. But careful framing didn't stop the comment sections from running. Maybe there's more to this story. Why was he approaching officers during an arrest? Sounds like the husband made it worse. Charlie read the comments once. Just once. Then he closed the tab and did not go back. What happened to Emily's video was worse. Charlie found the edited version Thursday morning through a colleague's text message. Someone had taken Emily's original footage and cut it cleanly, deliberately, removing the 18 seconds where Charlie held his credentials open and clearly identified himself as a federal agent. The edited version showed Sydney being handcuffed, then cut directly to Charlie stepping forward looking upset, with no context for why. It had been posted on 2 fringe platforms and had gathered 40,000 views before Emily's followers began flooding the comments with links to the original. Emily posted her own response video Thursday afternoon. She sat at her kitchen table, camera propped against a coffee mug, and held up her phone, showing both versions side by side. Her voice was unhurried and completely lethal. Someone cut my video. Took out the part where the man showed his federal badge. I want you to notice that. I want you to sit with what that tells you about who is afraid of what. Charlie saved Emily's response video and the edited clip side by side in the same folder. He documented the timestamps, the platform URLs, the view counts at the time of capture. He wrote it all down the same way he documented evidence at work. Clean, precise, without emotion bleeding into the margins. He was building something. He didn't have jurisdiction yet, but he was building it anyway. That evening, Sydney sat across from him at the dinner table and asked him directly what was happening online. He told her, all of it. He owed her that. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. She looked down at her plate. Then she looked back up at him with steady eyes. "They're scared," she said simply. Charlie nodded. "Good," she said, and she picked up her fork. The message from Gloria came Wednesday morning. Not a call. A message. 4 words sent to Charlie's personal phone at 8:02 a.m. while he was still drinking his first cup of coffee. My office, 2 p.m. today. He was there at 1:55. The Atlanta field office occupied the 14th floor of a glass building on Peachtree Street that caught the afternoon sun in a way that made the whole floor feel like it was on fire. Charlie had walked these hallways for 14 years. He knew every face, every squeaky floor tile, every coffee machine that didn't work properly. This place was as familiar to him as his own kitchen. Today, it felt different. He noticed the glances. Small ones, quickly looked away. A colleague near the elevator who said good morning, with just a half-second too much care in it. The particular quality of silence that follows a person who has become, temporarily, a subject of attention. He kept his expression neutral and walked straight to Gloria's office. She was behind her desk when he came in. Deputy Director Gloria Harmon was 61 years old, 30 years in the bureau, with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of stillness that powerful people develop when they have learned that reactions are expensive. She did not look up immediately when Charlie entered. She finished the line she was reading, set the paper down, and then looked at him. "Close the door," she said. He did. "Sit down." He did that, too. Gloria folded her hands on the desk and looked at him with an expression that was neither cold nor warm. It was the expression of a woman who was about to say something she had thought through carefully, and was not going to say twice. "Your name is in 3 regional news stories, and 2 national ones," she said. "Your wife's name is in all 5. The Bureau is aware of the situation. People above my pay grade are aware of the situation." She paused. "I need you to understand what that means for how we proceed." "I understand it," Charlie said. "I don't think you fully do," Gloria said, not unkindly. "Because if you did, you wouldn't have called Harold Green on Sunday morning." Charlie said nothing. "You contacted a potential witness in what may become a federal matter," Gloria continued. "You did it from your personal phone on a Sunday without authorization, while your own name was actively circulating in press coverage about the underlying incident." She let that sit in the air between them for a moment. "I know why you did it. I'm not questioning your instincts. Your instincts are correct. The pattern you sent me is real, and it is significant." She leaned forward slightly. "But right now, you are not an investigator in this matter. You are a witness, and there is a very important difference." "They're going to bury it," Charlie said. His voice stayed level, but the words carried weight. "Dunham has buried 6 complaints in 4 years. They have a review board process ready to run, Gloria. I've seen how these things go." "So have I," Gloria said quietly. "I've seen more of them than you have." The room was still for a moment. "Until a formal investigation is officially authorized," Gloria said, "you cannot conduct one. Not personally, not informally, not through back channels." She held his eyes. "I believe you, Charlie. Everything you sent me, I believe it. But belief is not jurisdiction." Charlie looked at her for a long moment. "And the authorization?" "Is being considered at the appropriate level." She said it carefully. "That is all I can tell you right now." He nodded once. He stood. He thanked her and walked to the door. "Charlie." He turned. Gloria's expression had shifted almost imperceptibly. Something underneath the professional stillness. Something that looked, briefly, like the face of a woman who had also spent 30 years carrying her receipts. "Be patient," she said, "and be careful." He sat in the parking garage for 22 minutes before starting the engine. The concrete structure was dim and cool and smelled like motor oil. Somewhere above him, the building hummed with the activity of the institution he had given his adult life to. The institution that had just told him to wait, to be patient, to trust the process. He thought about Harold Green's daughter, 26 years old, scared for her father. He thought about Dunham's face in the precinct lobby, that practiced smile, that politician's handshake. He thought about Sydney, sitting straight in that cold room with the blinking camera in the corner. He started the engine. He drove home. He did not turn on the radio. He pulled into the driveway and sat looking at the lit windows of his house. Warm yellow light, Sydney moving somewhere inside. The ordinary life they had built together on the other side of that glass. He thought about the word Gloria had used. Jurisdiction. He didn't have it yet, but he was going to get it. 3 weeks passed. Life settled into a strange kind of rhythm. Sydney went to work. Charlie went to work. They ate dinner together, talked about ordinary things, and tried not to let the situation take up every room in their house. Some evenings were easier than others. Some nights Charlie lay awake staring at the ceiling long after Sydney had fallen asleep, running through everything he knew and everything he couldn't yet prove. Emily Romers's original video had plateaued at 4.1 million views. The edited version had been taken down from both platforms after sustained reporting campaigns by Emily's followers. The Corridor Gazette story had mostly faded, crowded out by newer news cycles. But the underlying situation hadn't gone anywhere. It sat in the public consciousness like a splinter, small enough to ignore some days, impossible to forget on others. The pressure had been building quietly in the background. Petitions, community meetings, 3 separate op-eds in the Atlanta Constitution-Journal. A group of Maywood residents who called themselves the Coalition for Accountable Policing had been showing up to city council sessions every Tuesday night for 2 weeks, filling the public comment period with names and dates and demands. It was working. Slowly. Imperfectly. But working. Charlie was in his home office Tuesday evening when his phone buzzed. He turned on the television. The Maywood City Council was mid-session, the chamber more crowded than usual, camera phones visible in the gallery. Councilman Timothy Silva sat at the center of the council dais in a charcoal suit, his expression calibrated to project gravity. He leaned toward his microphone and cleared his throat. The council, he announced, had voted unanimously to appoint an independent review board to investigate the conduct of Officer Ryan Mitchell in connection with the March 14th incident. The board would be chaired by retired Judge Arthur Pendleton and would deliver its findings within 6 weeks. The process would be thorough, transparent, and fair. He said the word fair twice. The gallery applauded. Several people in the back row stood up. Charlie's phone started buzzing before Silva had finished his sentence. Harold Green called first. His voice was full of something Charlie hadn't heard in it before. A looseness, a brightness, like a man who had been holding his breath and had finally let it go. "They're actually doing something," Harold said. "Agent Tillman, they're actually doing something." "They announced a review board," Charlie said carefully. "That's something. That's more than we had last week." Harold's voice was warm with relief. "My daughter just called me. She saw it on the news. She was crying." Charlie didn't say what he was thinking. He told Harold the news was encouraging and that he would stay in touch. He meant both things. Emily Romers posted a short video from her living room. She was cautious, deliberately, pointedly cautious, saying only that the announcement was a first step and that she would believe in the process when she saw its results. Her followers received it as the measured optimism of a woman who had learned the hard way not to celebrate before the finish line. That evening, Charlie and Sydney sat together on the living room couch and watched the local news replay Silva's announcement. Sydney had her feet tucked under her and a mug of tea going cold on the side table. The television light played across her face. When Silva finished speaking, she reached over and squeezed Charlie's hand. "It's working," she said. Charlie nodded. He kept his eyes on the screen. She fell asleep on the couch an hour later, her head tipped against his shoulder. He stayed still so he wouldn't wake her, his phone face down on the cushion beside him. When her breathing had been slow and even for long enough, He carefully reached for his laptop. He started with the review board's charter, a public document posted to the city website that same evening. He read it the way he read everything, slowly, looking for what wasn't there. The board's mandate was defined in clean, official language. It was also, he noticed, very specifically scoped. It covered the events of March 14th. Only March 14th. The 6 prior complaints were not mentioned anywhere in the charter. Then he pulled up Judge Arthur Pendleton. Retired, 12 years on the Maywood County bench, civic awards, community service. All clean, all unremarkable. Charlie kept going. He cross-referenced Pendleton's name against public records from the last 5 years and found it in a digitized event program from a 2023 fundraising dinner. The kind of glossy document civic organizations posted online and forgot about. Character testimonial provided by the Honorable Arthur Pendleton, Ret. The dinner was for Councilman Timothy Silva's re-election campaign. Charlie wrote it down. He added it to the file he had been building since the night of the arrest. The file that was growing heavier every week with the specific weight of things that were never supposed to connect. He did not wake Sydney. She had slept better this past week than at any point since the arrest. There was color back in her face. She had laughed at dinner twice. She had hope right now, real and fragile and necessary, and it was doing something good for her. He closed the laptop gently. He set it on the coffee table, leaned back against the couch cushions, and let her sleep. The 6 weeks moved slowly. Charlie and Sydney had learned, without discussing it directly, how to hold the waiting. Sydney threw herself into work. A new literacy program she had been designing for months. A struggling sophomore she was mentoring through a difficult home situation. The 10,000 small acts of leadership that made up a principal's week. Charlie worked his regular caseload, filed his reports, attended his meetings, and kept his expression neutral whenever someone at the field office glanced at him with that particular mixture of sympathy and professional distance. At home, they were careful with each other. Not cold, never cold, just careful. The way people are when they both know something fragile is sitting in the middle of the room, and neither one wants to be the person who knocks it over. Harold Green called once a week, always on Sunday afternoons. The calls were short. He mostly wanted to know if there was anything new. Charlie mostly had to tell him there wasn't. But Harold kept calling, and Charlie kept answering, and somewhere in that consistency there was a kind of faith that neither of them named out loud. Tuesday morning arrived like any other. Judge Arthur Pendleton convened the review board's final public session at 9 a.m. in the Maywood Municipal Building's main hearing room. The room was full. Community members, journalists, 3 cameras from local television stations. The Coalition for Accountable Policing occupied an entire row near the front, their matching green shirts visible from the back of the room. Charlie watched the live stream from his home office with the door closed and a cup of coffee he never touched. Pendleton spoke for 22 minutes. His delivery was measured and judicial, the practiced cadence of a man who had presided over courtrooms for 12 years and knew how to make conclusions sound inevitable. He reviewed the board's process, the evidence examined, and the standards applied. He acknowledged that the situation had caused distress to those involved. He noted that community trust was a value the department took seriously. Then he delivered the findings. Officer Ryan Mitchell had acted in full compliance with established departmental guidelines. The board found no basis for disciplinary action. It noted, in a single subordinate clause buried in the 4th paragraph, that the situation could have benefited from greater officer sensitivity. That was it. That was the whole acknowledgement. One clause, passive voice, no name attached to it. Sergeant Troy Dunham was formally commended for his swift and professional resolution of a community relations incident. Charlie stared at the screen. At the press conference immediately following, A reporter asked Councilman Silva directly why the board had not reviewed the 6 prior complaints against Mitchell. Silva adjusted his microphone and smiled patiently. The board's mandate, he said, was specifically scoped to the events of March 14th. That was the incident that came before the council. The board was thorough and fair within that mandate. Any additional matters would require a separate process through the appropriate channels. The reporter followed up. Were those additional matters referred to any separate process? Silva smiled again. We appreciate the board's diligent work and remain committed to. Charlie closed the laptop. He called Harold Green twice that afternoon. The calls went to voicemail. He left one message. Short, careful, honest. He told Harold he was sorry. He told him this wasn't over. He meant both things completely. Harold didn't call back that day, or the next. Sydney came home from school on Tuesday evening and pulled into the driveway at 4:30 p.m. Charlie watched through the front window as her car sat there, engine off, completely still. 4 minutes passed. Then 6. Then 9. He started toward the door and then stopped himself, understanding that she needed those minutes, that they were hers. At the 15-minute mark, she got out of the car. She came through the front door, set her bag down, and stood in the kitchen with her hands flat on the counter and her head slightly bowed. Charlie stood in the doorway and didn't speak. After a moment, she straightened up, turned around, and looked at him with dry eyes and a tight jaw. 6 complaints, she said. Her voice was quiet and very controlled. 6 people. And they just... She stopped. She pressed her lips together. They just erased them. I know, Charlie said. She nodded once. Then she walked past him toward the bedroom to change out of her work clothes, and Charlie stood alone in the kitchen and let the weight of the day settle around him. The letter arrived Thursday. It came through the FBI's internal HR system, routed to Charlie's official bureau email with a standard administrative header. He read it standing at the kitchen table. A formal complaint had been filed against Special Agent Charlie Tillman, alleging improper use of federal credentials to intimidate local law enforcement officers during an arrest on March 14th. The complaint was anonymous. An internal review had been opened. Charlie was advised to retain counsel and to direct any questions to the Office of Professional Responsibility. He read it once. Then he read it again. He set the letter face down on the kitchen table. He stood there with both hands pressed flat against the surface and stared at the wall in front of him. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car passed slowly. The house was very quiet. He did not move for a long time. Charlie didn't sleep that night. He lay in the dark beside Sydney and stared at the ceiling and listened to her breathe and thought about the letter sitting face down on the kitchen table. He thought about Dunham's handshake in the precinct lobby. He thought about Pendleton's 22 minutes of careful language that had amounted to nothing. He thought about Harold Green, who still hadn't called back, and about the 6 people whose complaints had been swallowed whole by a system that had been specifically built to swallow them. At 1 a.m. he got up quietly, careful not to wake Sydney, and went to the kitchen. He turned on the single light above the counter, just enough to work by, and sat down at the table. The letter was still there, face down where he'd left it. He didn't turn it over. He already knew what it said. He opened his laptop. He had spent the past several weeks being careful, measured, following Gloria's instructions, staying inside the lines, trusting the process the way the process kept asking him to trust it. He had watched that process deliver a commendation to Troy Dunham and a cleared record to Ryan Mitchell, and a single subordinate clause about sensitivity in place of any real accountability. And now the process had filed an anonymous complaint against him. He was done being patient. He pulled up everything he had built since the night of the arrest. The timeline, the 6 complaints, Harold Green's statement, the cross-referenced municipal records. He read through it all with fresh eyes, the way he approached cold cases at the bureau. Starting from zero, looking for the thing he hadn't pulled yet because he had been trying to be careful and proper and patient. He found it 40 minutes in. The commendation. It was sitting right there in Mitchell's public departmental record, exactly where it had always been. A formal commendation issued in the spring of 2021 for what the citation described as an outstanding narcotics interdiction resulting in a significant asset seizure. Councilman Timothy Silva had praised it publicly on 2 separate occasions, once at a city council session, once in a quote given to the Corridor Gazette. Charlie had noted it weeks ago and set it aside because he was being careful. He stopped being careful now. He pulled up the Maywood County Civil Court records and searched Darnell Hooper, the name listed in the arrest report attached to the commendation. 34 years old. The arrest report described a traffic stop on Route 9 in March 2021. Cash in the amount of $43,000 found in the vehicle. Mitchell had seized the money under civil asset forfeiture statutes, which allowed law enforcement to take property suspected of being connected to criminal activity, without charging the owner with a crime. Darnell Hooper had never been charged. Not with drug possession, not with trafficking, not with anything. The case had been opened, the money had been taken, and then the case had simply stopped. No prosecution. No return of funds. No explanation in any public document that Charlie could find. He sat back in his chair. Civil asset forfeiture was a legal process. It was also, in the hands of the wrong people, one of the cleanest ways to take money from someone who had done nothing wrong and make it nearly impossible for them to get it back. Charlie had worked cases involving exactly this mechanism. He knew precisely how it operated and precisely how it could be abused. Where had $43,000 gone? He didn't have the access to trace it from his kitchen table. He needed someone who could pull the right records through the right channels without triggering the wrong attention. He checked the time. 2:17 a.m. He picked up his phone anyway. Renee Vasquez answered on the 4th ring, her voice alert in the way of someone who kept journalists' hours. Charlie had known her since law school, 20 years, mutual respect, a shared understanding that information had weight and needed to be handled accordingly. Charlie. No surprise in her voice. Maybe she'd been expecting this call for weeks. "I need you to look at something," he said. "Not from me, from the public record. I'm going to tell you where to look. And everything you find yourself." "Understood," Renee said. "Talk." He told her about the commendation, about Darnell Hooper, about the $43,000 that had disappeared into the Maywood PD's asset fund. He gave her the case number, the court filing date, and the name of the municipal grant process he had found linked to the fund's disbursements. He gave her nothing she couldn't have found without him. He just told her exactly where to look. When he finished, Renee was quiet for a moment. "How deep does this go?" she asked. "Keep pulling," Charlie said. "You'll see." He ended the call and immediately dialed Gloria Harmon. She picked up on the 3rd ring. He told her about the HR complaint, the anonymous filing, the timing, the specific language alleging credential intimidation. He told her that, in his professional opinion, the complaint had been filed not because anyone believed it had merit, but because someone wanted him slowed down and looking over his shoulder. Then he said the word he had been building toward for weeks. "Retaliation," he said. "If that complaint was filed by someone inside Maywood PD, it's a federal matter, Gloria. It's an obstruction." A long silence on the line. "Send me everything," Gloria said. "Tonight." Charlie looked at the laptop screen, at Darnell Hooper's name in the court record, at the $43,000 that had gone somewhere it shouldn't have. For the first time since he'd stood in that parking lot with his badge in his hand, he felt the weight begin to shift. Renee Vasquez did not sleep much either. By the time Charlie had ended their call and gone to bed, she was already at her desk with 3 browser tabs open and a fresh legal pad beside her keyboard. She had been an investigative journalist for 19 years. She had learned early that the best stories were never found in the obvious places. They were found in the gaps between official documents, in the records that nobody had thought to cross-reference, in the paper trail that bureaucracies left behind precisely because they assumed nobody would ever bother to follow it. She pulled up the Maywood County Civil Court filings first. Over the following week, Renee made 3 separate trips to the Maywood Municipal Courthouse. She filed 2 FOIA requests, one to the Maywood Police Department for all asset seizure records from 2019 through 2024, and one to the city's finance office for the disbursement records of the Departmental Discretionary Fund over the same period. Both requests were acknowledged within the legally required window. Both were answered with the legally required minimum. It was enough. The asset seizure records showed what Charlie had already found. Darnell Hooper, Route 9 traffic stop, March 2021, $43,000 in cash seized under civil forfeiture statutes. No criminal charges ever filed. No return of funds documented. Renee requested the original traffic stop report and the forfeiture petition separately, through the court clerk's office. She sat at a wooden table in the courthouse records room on a Wednesday afternoon and read through every page. The probable cause listed in the forfeiture petition was thin. Aggressively, almost insultingly thin. It cited the amount of cash as suspicious in itself, noted that Hooper had been unable to provide what Mitchell described as a satisfactory explanation for the money, and referenced a small amount of residue found on one of the bills. Residue of a type, a footnote acknowledged, commonly found on everyday currency in general circulation. That was it. That was the whole basis for taking a man's $43,000. Darnell Hooper had hired a lawyer to contest the forfeiture. The case had been assigned to a civil court judge, had received 1 hearing date, and had then been continued twice before Hooper's attorney withdrew from the case without explanation. After that, nothing. The money sat in the Maywood PD's asset fund, officially classified as pending final disposition, which in practice meant it sat there indefinitely while the department used it. Renee pulled the discretionary fund disbursements next. The money moved through the fund in quarterly allocations, equipment purchases, training programs, community initiatives, standard line items, unremarkable on their surface. But one allocation appeared in 3 consecutive quarterly reports beginning in the summer of 2021. It was listed as a contribution to the Maywood Community Safety Initiative, a civic grant program administered through the City Council's Public Safety Committee. Councilman Timothy Silva chaired the Public Safety Committee. Renee pulled the Community Safety Initiative's public filings, nonprofit status, board of directors, program expenditures. The initiative's primary documented activity was a series of public forums, mailers, and community outreach events that, cross-referenced with dates, corresponded almost exactly with the active period of Silva's re-election campaign. She sat back in her chair and looked at what she had built across the legal pad. It was not a $1 million scandal. It was not a sprawling conspiracy with offshore accounts and encrypted communications. It was something smaller and in some ways more enraging, a small city machine running on small city corruption, where a cop took money from a man who had done nothing wrong, the money fed a fund that fed a politician's campaign, and the politician protected the cop who protected the fund. Circular, self-sustaining, and sitting right there in the public record for anyone willing to spend 3 courthouse visits and 2 FOIA requests to find it. She called Charlie on a Thursday evening to confirm her findings aligned with his research. "I need you to tell me if I'm missing anything," she said. "You're not missing anything," Charlie said. The Hooper forfeiture is the center of it, Renee said. Everything runs through that. Yes. A pause. I'm going to need to reach out to Hooper directly before I publish. He deserves to know, Charlie said. Whatever he decides about being in the story, he deserves to know. Gloria Harmon called Charlie the following morning. Her voice had the particular quality it got when she was delivering information that carried significant weight and wanted to make sure it landed correctly. The anonymous HR complaint filed against you, she said. Our internal team traced the originating account. Charlie held the phone very still against his ear. It came from a department email account registered to Sergeant Troy Dunham, Gloria said. He filed a false complaint against a federal agent through an official law enforcement channel. She paused. That is a federal crime, Charlie. Charlie exhaled slowly through his nose. We have him on record, Gloria continued. I'm moving forward with authorization. Charlie picked up his pen and wrote one word on the notepad in front of him. Authorization. He underlined it once. Then he set the pen down and looked at it for a long moment, feeling something in his chest that he hadn't felt since the night of the arrest. It wasn't a relief, exactly. It was the specific sensation of a door that had been locked for a very long time finally swinging open. The following Monday, Gloria Harmon formally opened a preliminary FBI Civil Rights Division inquiry into the Maywood Police Department. Charlie found out at 8 a.m. through an internal notification routed to his bureau email. He read it standing at the kitchen counter in his work clothes, coffee going cold beside him. The language was standard and procedural. Preliminary inquiry, Civil Rights Division, Maywood PD, case number assigned. Dry official language that meant nothing to anyone who didn't know what it meant. Charlie knew exactly what it meant. He set his phone down and finished his coffee. Gloria called him into her office at 9. She was already behind her desk when he arrived, 2 folders open in front of her and a third stacked beside them. She looked like a woman who had been working since 6 and intended to keep working until considerably later. Sit down, she said. He sat. I want to be clear about your role going forward, she said. You are recused from this investigation, completely and without exception. Your personal connection to the underlying incident makes your involvement untenable from an evidentiary standpoint. Any findings touched by your direct participation become challengeable in court. She looked at him steadily. I need you to understand that this is not a punishment. It is the only way the case survives long enough to matter. Charlie nodded. I understand. I mean it, Charlie. No contact with witnesses. No back-channel communication with Vasquez about the investigation's direction. No involvement of any kind. She held his eyes. The 3 agents I'm assigning to this are excellent. Let them work. Understood, Charlie said. He meant it completely. He had spent 14 years building cases that had to survive courtrooms, and he knew better than anyone that a compromised chain of custody could unravel years of work in a single hearing. He was not going to be the reason this case fell apart. He was not going to give Mitchell's defense attorney a single thread to pull. The Dunham complaint, he said, referred to the Bureau's Office of Professional Responsibility this morning, Gloria said. Filing a false complaint against a federal agent through an official law enforcement channel. That referral moves independently of the civil rights inquiry. It's its own matter with its own timeline. She paused. Troy Dunham has a very difficult few months ahead of him. Charlie said nothing. He let that sit exactly where it deserved to sit. The Georgia Attorney General's office has also been notified of the asset seizure findings, Gloria continued. Vasquez's FOIA material and the court records she pulled have been flagged for parallel review. That investigation moves on their timeline, not ours. She closed the top folder. This is bigger than Mitchell now. You understand that? Yes, Charlie said. Good. She looked at him for a moment with the expression he had learned to read over 6 years of working for her. The one that meant she was about to say something that existed slightly outside the official conversation. Go home tonight. Have dinner with your wife. Let the people I've assigned do what I've assigned them to do. Charlie stood. He extended his hand across the desk. Gloria shook it. Her grip was firm and brief. You did this right, she said quietly, when it would have been very easy not to. He picked up dinner on the way home. Nothing complicated. Roasted chicken from the place on Vine Street that Sydney liked, green beans, cornbread. He set it out on the kitchen table and texted her that food was ready when she got home. She walked through the door 20 minutes later, set her bag down, and stopped when she saw the table. What's the occasion? She asked. No occasion, Charlie said. Sit down. They ate together, and he told her everything. The authorization, the recusal, the referral on Dunham's complaint, the Attorney General's office. He laid it out the same way he had laid out everything for her since the beginning. Clearly, completely, without softening the edges or inflating the promising parts. Sydney listened without interrupting. She ate her cornbread, and she listened, and when he finished, she was quiet for a moment, her hands wrapped around her glass of water. The right way? She asked. The same question she had asked him on Sunday evening, weeks ago, when he had told her it was almost over. The only way, Charlie said. The same answer. She nodded slowly. Something in her shoulders let go. A tension she had been carrying so long she had probably stopped noticing it was there. Outside the kitchen window, Maywood, Georgia sat under an early evening sky going pink and gold at the edges. The same town it had always been. The same streets, the same houses, the same people going about their Saturday afternoons and their Sunday services and their ordinary lives. Something underneath all of it was about to change. Tuesday morning arrived quietly. Charlie was up at 6, dressed by 6:30, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and his phone face up when the notification appeared. Renee Vasquez's story had just gone live on the Atlanta Constitution-Journal website. He clicked the link and read every word from the headline down to the final paragraph, the same way he read everything, slowly, carefully, looking for the shape of it. It was good. It was precise and devastating, and completely, verifiably true. A badge, a pattern, and $43,000 inside Maywood's culture of impunity. He set his phone down and finished his coffee. By noon, every major national outlet had picked up the story. Charlie watched it happen from his home office, tracking the spread across news sites and social media platforms with the focused attention of a man who understood that the next 24 hours were going to determine how permanently this thing landed. The Constitution-Journal story had the receipts, the FOIA documents, the court filings, the asset seizure records, the discretionary fund disbursements, the Community Safety Initiative filings with Silva's name running through all of them like a thread. It was not the kind of story that could be dismissed as speculation or countered with anonymous sources. It was documents, dates, dollar amounts. By 1 p.m., 3 national television anchors had said Darnell Hooper's name on air. By 3 p.m., the Georgia Attorney General's office issued a statement confirming it had opened a formal review of Maywood PD's civil asset seizure practices going back 5 years. The statement was 4 sentences long and used careful legal language, but what it said underneath the careful language was unmistakable. The state was moving. At 5 p.m., Councilman Timothy Silva's office released a statement canceling all public appearances for the foreseeable future, citing scheduling conflicts. His communications director did not respond to follow-up calls. Mitchell was placed on administrative leave Wednesday morning. The Maywood PD's press release described it as a routine personnel action pending a departmental review. It was 2 sentences. It did not mention the FBI. It did not mention Renee's story. It did not mention the 6 complaints, or the commendation, or Darnell Hooper's $43,000. But it didn't need to. Everyone reading it knew exactly what it meant and exactly what had caused it. Dunham resigned Wednesday afternoon. His attorney released a statement describing his client as a dedicated 30-year public servant who was stepping down to focus on his family during a challenging time. The statement was 4 paragraphs long and said nothing that was technically false and nothing that was remotely true about what was actually happening. Charlie read it once and set it aside. The following week, federal civil rights violation charges were formally filed against Ryan Mitchell. The charging document listed 3 specific incidents from the prior complaint record alongside the March 14th arrest. Harold Green's name was the second one listed. Dunham faced 2 separate charges: obstruction of justice for his documented pattern of suppressing the departmental complaints, and filing a false federal complaint for the anonymous HR filing traced to his department email account. Silva was formally designated a subject of the ongoing state and federal investigation into the Asset Seizure Fund. His attorney issued a statement. Nobody called Silva for comment. He had stopped answering. Charlie was in the kitchen when Harold Green called. It was a Thursday evening just after dinner. Sydney was in the living room. Charlie heard his phone buzz on the counter and looked at the screen and picked it up immediately. "Harold, I saw the charges." Harold's voice was different from every other time they had spoken. The carefulness was gone. The guardedness was gone. What was underneath it, what Harold Green actually sounded like when he wasn't bracing for disappointment, was a warm, deep steadiness that reminded Charlie of Sunday morning church bells. "Agent Tillman, they actually filed charges." "They did," Charlie said. A long breath on the line. "My daughter called me this morning. She was crying again." He paused. "Good crying this time." Charlie leaned against the counter. "You stayed in this, Harold, when it would have been easier to walk away. You stayed." "We both did," Harold said quietly. "Yes," Charlie said. "We did." After the call ended, Charlie stood in the kitchen for a moment with his phone in his hand. Through the doorway, he could see Sydney on the living room couch, feet tucked under her, a book open on her lap. The evening news was playing low on the television behind her. Mitchell's name was on the screen. She wasn't watching it. She was reading her book in her own home on a Thursday evening, in the quiet, ordinary life that nobody had managed to take from her. Charlie put his phone in his pocket and went to sit beside her. 3 months after the arrest, the Maywood City Council chambers filled up on a Tuesday evening in a way they never had before. Every seat was taken. People stood along the back wall 2 deep. The gallery held community members, journalists, and 3 television cameras whose cables snaked across the floor toward the exits. The Coalition for Accountable Policing sat together in the 3rd row in their green shirts, quieter than they had been at any previous session. Emily Romers sat in the 2nd row, with her hands folded in her lap and her phone deliberately left in her purse. Every council member was present. There were no empty chairs at the dais. Charlie and Sydney sat in the front row. He was in a dark suit. She was in a deep burgundy dress that she had pressed herself that morning, taking her time with it, getting it exactly right. She sat with her back straight and her hands loose in her lap, and she looked like what she was, a woman who had been asked to come here and receive something that should never have needed to be given. Councilman Silva's seat was occupied by a newly appointed interim member. Silva himself had not been seen at a public function in 6 weeks. The session was called to order. The formal apology took 11 minutes to read. The council president, a woman named Barbara Mercer, who had replaced Silva's ally on the dais 2 weeks prior, read from a prepared document in a clear, unhurried voice. It named Sidney Tillman specifically. It named the date. It described what had happened in the Brentwood Mall parking lot without euphemism or bureaucratic softening. The wrongful detention, the failure to honor federal credentials, the processing of an innocent woman who had committed no crime and harmed no one. It acknowledged the department's pattern of complaint suppression. It used the word systemic twice and did not flinch from it. It was the most honest thing the Maywood City Council had ever read into its official record. When Mercer finished, she looked up from the document and said that Sidney Tillman had asked to address the council. Sidney stood. She walked to the podium at the front of the room and adjusted the microphone and looked out at the council members sitting behind their dais. She took one breath. Then she spoke. "I want you to understand something," she said. Her voice was steady and unhurried and carried to every corner of that room. "I had my receipts that afternoon. I had them in my bag, exactly where I always keep them." She paused. "I want you to think about that word, always. I am a 34-year-old school principal. I have never stolen anything in my life, and I carry my receipts every single time I go shopping." She let that sit for a moment. "Not because I'm careless, not because I'm forgetful, because I was raised in this country, because my mother taught me early that the world would sometimes need more proof from me than it needed from other people. And she was right. She has always been right." The room was completely silent. "I stood in that parking lot in handcuffs in front of strangers on a Saturday afternoon," Sidney continued, "while my proof sat right there in my bag and nobody wanted to see it. And I want you to understand that the thing that hurt most was not the handcuffs. It was that I had expected it enough to be prepared for it." She looked directly at the council members. Several of them looked at the table. One, the youngest, a man in his 30s who had joined the council 8 months ago, looked straight back at her with the specific expression of someone being permanently changed by what they were hearing. "That ends now. Not just for me." She stepped back from the microphone. She walked back to her seat and sat down beside Charlie. He took her hand without looking at her. She held it without looking at him. They both looked straight ahead. The room stayed quiet for a full 3 seconds before the applause began. The months that followed moved with the satisfying, grinding certainty of a machine running exactly as it was supposed to run. Ryan Mitchell was convicted on federal civil rights violation charges. He was sentenced, stripped of his badge permanently, and barred from law enforcement for life. He would never put handcuffs on anyone again. Troy Dunham pleaded guilty to filing a false federal complaint. His 30 years of service did not protect him. They were noted in the sentencing memo and ignored. The city of Maywood settled a civil lawsuit brought by Sidney Tillman and 5 of the 6 prior complainants, Harold Green among them, for $2.1 million. Every complainant was named in the public settlement documents. Every story was recorded. None of them were footnotes. The Maywood Police Department was placed under a 5-year federal consent decree requiring independent oversight of all use-of-force incidents and complaint reviews. Darnell Hooper received his $43,000 back in full, with court-ordered interest, on a Wednesday morning. His attorney released a single statement on his behalf. It was 1 sentence long. He just wants his life back. Emily Romers was given a Community Leadership Award by the Georgia NAACP. She hung it in her living room beside a photograph of her late mother, who had marched in Birmingham in 1963. When a reporter asked her what she wanted people to take away from everything that had happened, she thought about it for a moment and then said, "Hold up your phone, and don't you dare put it down." On a Saturday afternoon in early summer, Charlie and Sidney walked out of Brentwood Mall together. Same parking lot. Same Georgia sun. The funnel cake stand was back near the east entrance. Families moved between cars. A group of teenagers cut through the lot on their way somewhere else, loud and unhurried. Sydney was carrying one shopping bag. She reached into her purse for her keys, and her fingers brushed something. She pulled it out. A receipt. She looked at it for just a second. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it back into her purse. Charlie saw it. He opened his mouth. She looked up at him with a small, quiet smile that contained about 20 different things at once. "Old habits," she said. He closed his mouth. Then he smiled too, slowly, the way a person smiles when something is both a wound and a badge of honor. And they have decided finally to wear it as the latter. He took her hand. They walked to the car. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.